Well, education, as we all know, is a very, very powerful tool indeed. At its best, what education can do is prepare young people for the challenges they will face in their lives. And education has done this in all human societies, even back into the Paleolithic. It does that by helping them see their place in society, the world, and the universe, by providing a large sort of framework so they know where they are, when they are, and what the challenges are that they face. Now, education can do this really in two distinct ways. The first way is that it provides knowledge, lots of knowledge for young people as they navigate their lives. This is something that modern education everywhere in the world really does pretty well. The second task of education is to provide a large story, a sort of map of reality, so that it shows how everything fits together and people can see how they fit into the scheme of things. And this is a job that modern education does lamentably badly, and I think everywhere in the world. So I think what young people desperately need is, I think of it as a view from the mountaintop, and this slide is an attempt to capture that feeling, so they can see the bigger picture, so they can see how many different things fit together. To give an idea of what I mean by a framing story or an origin story, let me go back to Newton's era, because Newton's education, like the education of many people in the past, was based on a framing story. He grew up in England, so his framing story was the Christian origin story. He learned that origin story in school, in church, then in university, and he became a very, very sophisticated theologian. And that story taught him his place in the universe. And it also provided a sort of framework for his science by linking all the knowledge that he assembled in his ideas on physics. There's a wonderful quote from Newton that I love. He once described the universe as, and I quote, "the sensorium of a being incorporeal, living, and intelligent." Now, I believe that today we need a new science-based origin story, but one that is for all societies on Earth, not just for particular cultures. This is my son, Joshua, his son, Daniel, and his daughter, Evie Rose. She's the cool one with the dark glasses. They are Sophia's cousins, and they too will need this story, because in 20, 30 years' time, these two young people will, like their whole generation, have their hands on the levers that manage an entire planet. What they'll need is an origin story for all, based on modern science, based on the very best of modern science. And in recent decades, many scholars, historians, scientists, scholars of other kinds have assembled a modern, global, science-based origin story that tells the history of the universe, Earth, and humanity, and can frame all of knowledge so that people don't get lost in the details. This story explores many different disciplines. It links different disciplines. Let me give a brief sense of how I tell it in my own teaching. There are many ways of teaching this, but this is just one way of telling it. I tell it as a story of increasing complexity, of how the universe builds new things stage by stage. And I tell it as a story of 8 thresholds of increasing complexity. The first of those thresholds is, of course, the creation of the universe itself, 13.8 billion years ago. And as we talk about this, we introduce students to some basic ideas of modern cosmology. The second threshold is the creation of the first stars. That introduces students to basic ideas about astronomy. And stars are really the first really complex things in our universe. The third threshold is perhaps less obvious. It's the creation of most of the elements in the periodic table. The early universe consisted basically of just hydrogen and helium, and you couldn't make the sort of world we live in with those elements. So how were the rest of the elements of the periodic table made? They were made basically inside dying stars. That's the third threshold. And after that threshold, you have a universe that's chemically more complicated, and you can make chemically complex astronomical bodies such as planets and our Earth. And it's the chemical complexity of Earth. Oh, by the way, we've moved now into chemistry and then into geology. It's the chemical complexity of our Earth that allows the fifth stage, which is the creation of life. Life appeared pretty soon after our Earth was formed. Now, the sixth threshold in the way I tell the story is the appearance of our own species. This may seem anthropocentric, but as I've argued, I think humans really do mark a turning point in the history of planet Earth. And now we're in anthropology. And then there are two more thresholds in human history. The seventh is the appearance of agricultural societies about 10,000 years ago. Agricultural societies have more information, they have more power, and the power of humans begins to grow and accelerate. And then in threshold 8, which takes place in just the last 2 centuries, we see the formation of today's global society based on the burning of fossil fuels. So now we've moved into history, and that's the story as I tell it. And I hope you can see how this story helps students see the links between many, many different disciplines and their place in an evolving planet and universe.